It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars podcast, back again to talk all things Star Wars. Now, there's not a lot of news going on. As a matter of fact, there's not any news. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of fun, because people are making up news. That's right. People are going on the internet and lying about Star Wars to make money and to get more clicks and subscriptions to their YouTube channels. So, I'm going to have a little fun this week, and we're going to tear down some of these rumors. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about how The Mandalorian was the last thing that not only society in terms of pop culture, but more specifically Star Wars fans, The Mandalorian was the last thing that we all agreed was good. Does this mean anything for the future of Star Wars? I'll speculate, talk a little bit about the rise of Skywalker and my fascination with the Sith Eternal, and listener feedback. I'm glad you're with the show this week. It is brought to you by mynerdworld.net, which is, of course, where you can find out about all things My Nerd World and the EMBARK science fiction space opera series. More details on that a little bit later on in the show. But speaking of which, let's not waste any more time and get right to it.
It's an instinct. Feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited, and now you're coming together. Is your undoing. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny.
The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
Hey, it's Jon Justice, and welcome to My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast. I took last weekend off for no good reason. It's actually the truth. I just didn't do the show last week. Well, there wasn't a lot going on, and I hadn't taken a break from the Star Wars podcast in quite a long time, and decided that, you know what, I'm going to do a little bit of a reset. I'm going to take a break from doing the show this week. And honestly, I'm glad. I'm really glad that I did. I've had some stuff that I've been working on when it comes to the science fiction novels I've been writing. I have a little bit of information about that later on in the show. I had a birthday in the middle of the week. I'm a ripe old 48-year-old, and it gave me the opportunity to sit on a couple of things that I wanted to talk about on the show this week. There isn't any news going on right now. And so I mentioned that at the top. There just hasn't been anything coming out. I'm hopeful that within the next couple of months, given that we were supposed to be, all at Celebration at the end of August, that with that being canceled because of everything going on in the world, and I hope that you are currently healthy and safe wherever you are. I'm hoping that Disney will start dropping some Star Wars news that we most likely would have been given at Star Wars Celebration. But right now, all is quiet in a galaxy far, far away. And when all is quiet in a galaxy far, far away, often shows do not know what to do in terms of material. Some of the shows that I like to listen to have been doing a good job and have been very entertaining. But again, part of the reason why I figured it was a good time to take a break from doing the show just because of the lack of news. But this lack of news does present opportunities for people that, let's just say, we'll call for the sake of argument, liars. Yes, that's right. It gives the opportunity for people to lie in order to bring about clicks and subscriptions and dollars to their channels. And so I thought maybe I'd do something different, a little bit different this week. Not a little bit different this week. I thought that, you know what, I'll tackle some of these rumors and give you my thoughts. Now, I'm going to say up front that, the show is a positive show. I talk very positive about Star Wars because I love Star Wars, and I do not complain very much about the franchise. I'll criticize, and I'll say things I don't like, but I often keep it really positive on the show. I'm going to be a little negative on the show this week, and not about the Star Wars content, but about the liars that I mentioned a moment ago. So I just want to kind of give you a heads up that that's where I'm going to be heading on the show this week. And what I'm hoping to accomplish is, you listen to this show, you're probably checking out a bunch of different shows, most likely. And if you're doing that, you've probably seen that which I'm going to talk about. And I know for me, when I see this garbage out there, I'm really thankful that I have a podcast with a sizable audience that I can talk to and get it out of my system. But not all of you have podcasts. And so hopefully I can speak for you with regard to some of the garbage that's been thrown about within the fandom as of late. So that'll be the first part of the show, and then we will be diving into a couple other items. I heard a really interesting comment on another podcast that I enjoy quite a bit, and it got me thinking down a certain track. So I want to share that with you, and it's about the Mandalorian and how the Mandalorian pre-coronavirus, when it came out, was and specifically for this show, the last thing we all agreed upon in Star Wars and pop culture that was good. So I want to talk a little bit about what that could potentially mean for the future of Star Wars. We know that we're getting these live action TV shows, and ask the question of whether or not this is a good thing. The Mandalorian was something we all agreed upon. And then I want to talk a bit about The Rise of Skywalker, and there's one particular website that I'm not a big fan of, but what they've done with a couple of articles is they've culled some of the information that's available in the ancillary Star Wars material and put out a couple of articles about a portion of The Rise of Skywalker that I find really fascinating, and that is the situation on Exegol, Palpatine, and the Sith Eternal. So I'll give you some thoughts on that. Just something that I personally want to talk about this week, and hopefully you find entertaining. And then we'll do a little bit of listener feedback. So with all that being said, let's dive into the nonsense. And I have to thank a listener and friend of the show, Brian Martin, who sent me this link. I'd seen these stories online, but he sent me this link from Cosmic Book News. And there's one individual whose name I will not mention on the show because, one, it's offensive, which is going to be a part of my tearing down the lies of this. I'm not going to mention who this individual is by name. For the sake of argument, I'm just going to refer to them as idiot for the remainder of this portion of the podcast. If you, again, follow any of these shows, you know this rumor that's been going around about Star Wars erasing The Last Jedi and, more specifically, erasing the sequel trilogy altogether. As you can tell from my change in tone, that was my warning up front. I'm going to be really sarcastic because this kind of stuff really annoys me. And I feel personally the need that with this garbage that gets out there in the fandom, there needs to be some proper pushback from other parts of the fandom that don't lie in order to get people to listen to their shows and to get more subscriptions and AdSense dollars from Google and YouTube. But Brian Martin, a friend of the show, had sent me this. He says, hey, here's this link. Can you share your thoughts on this? Okay. So, again, let me reiterate. I will not be saying who covered this in particular because they're items. I mean, because they are liars. Okay. And how do I know they are liars? Well, let's say this up front. This is how I know they're liars. Because anyone with this info would not be the kind of idiot to go and hide behind an offensive avatar. It is. Look, I'm not offended. I'm just saying that the person's name is offensive. It's just stupid and juvenile, right? I'm fine with juvenile. I haven't really matured beyond the age of 16, but even I would never go by this type of moniker. Okay, so beyond that, how else do I know this individual is lying? Well, I also know this individual is lying for a couple of different reasons. Let me give you some examples. The child in The Mandalorian, that never got out in public. MakingStarWars.net did at one point say that there would be a Yoda potentially species in The Mandalorian. But the specific nature that this was going to be a child Yoda species was never leaked fully. Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker never got leaked prior to the laugh that appeared in the teaser trailer. Do you really think that this idiot knows the corporate inner workings of Lucasfilm? Do you really think that if Lucasfilm is still able to keep plot items under wraps on productions, that anybody would really have, especially an individual like this, would really have the insight into the inner corporate workings at Disney and at Lucasfilm? But what's fascinating about this is that's not really what they did. See, what this person did is they shrouded this whole thing in ambiguity so that they have this plausible deniability regardless of the way that the future of Star Wars shakes out. All right, so let's dive into this. All right, and maybe I won't refer to him as idiot. I'll just be this person because I don't even want to give him that much credit. So this is some of the details of the article from Cosmic Book News. A new rumor, and I'm going to be very sarcastic. I'm warning you right now. I'm going to be super sarcastic, okay? I'll drop it once we move on to some funner items. But I really want to shred this whole thing because so many clickbait articles and so many YouTube videos have come out based off this stupid rumor. And it's all that it was just it's just fake news. There's the person just sat there and just made up a bunch of garbage. And that's what's so, I'll do that thing with my fingers, clever about this type of stuff, because these types of liars, they cloud what they're saying in that kind of ambiguity and dance around specificity. And then later, if there's any changes in this case, and we'll get into the details, any changes revolving Kathleen Kennedy stepping down from her post and whoever is going to come in and take over in her stead, they can go and claim victory. Oh, some things might have changed. It didn't happen soon enough. Obviously, Kathleen Kennedy is not going to stay in the position that she's in at Lucasfilm forever. So these jerks go out there and they make up this stuff so they can get the clicks in the absence of other news, rather than actually stopping and thinking, wow, you know what? There are all these films and content that we can go and talk about, but you know what? I'll make stuff up instead. All right, so this is what Cosmic Book News has to say. A new rumor has hit the net offering that some sort of Disney Star Wars reset is in the works that will see The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker basically erased. The rumor comes from the future ruler of the Earth, this guy, right, who has a YouTube channel and has recently offered that a Star Wars Civil War is happening inside Lucasfilm between Kathleen Kennedy and Jon Favreau. Yeah, you know, it's really interesting when I watch those Mandalorian Gallery episodes and I see Kathleen Kennedy sitting around that table talking with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. It really looks like there's a civil war and a lot of animosity between those individuals. Totally. It just looks like Kathleen Kennedy with that big smile on her face and this wonderful conversation they're having about the production of The Mandalorian. You read between the lines and it really looks like she's ready just to leap across the table and strangle Jon Favreau. Sense the sarcasm. There's an update to this, by the way. Cosmic Book News updated this. It's claimed that the Star Wars reset involves Kathleen Kennedy stepping down and possibly Jon Favreau named as the head of Lucasfilm. All right, so let's go on. So the article goes on to say, Disney Star Wars trilogy getting nullified. Getting back to the rumor, this person, idiot, says that plans are in place to save the Star Wars franchise, which involves Abrams and Rian Johnson's trilogy being nullified. It's claimed that the Disney Star Wars trilogy will be erased using a concept that was recently made canon in the Star Wars Rebels animated series. And here's what's so ridiculous about this, is that this person couldn't even bother to come up with something like fresh and new. People, and what they're talking about is, you probably already guessed it, it's the World Between Worlds concept in the Veil of the Force episode. People have been talking about that since that episode dropped. How many different rumors did we see swirling around the Rise of Skywalker that they thought the World Between Worlds was going to be implemented in that movie? Or that the World Between Worlds would be utilized later on to bring back Ben Solo from the Force, right? But this individual doesn't even go through with a level of ambiguity. They actually claim, I have received confirmation from 2 additional sources claiming that this is spot on. Gee, I wonder if that was Mike Zero and Mike Zero. Indeed, that Lucasfilm realizes they have a massive problem on their hands, that the Star Wars franchise is all but dead, and despite Kathleen Kennedy's hatred of this idea, Lucasfilm is preparing to render the sequel trilogy null and void. Yes, the Star Wars franchise is all but dead. Now, there's a portion of the fandom that's dead because they're making money off of spreading lies like this. That fandom, you're not a fan. You go and do stuff like this, you're not a real fan. You know, the Mike Zeros of the world, idiots like this person with the offensive name, you're not a fan of this franchise. You know, if that part of the fandom wants to look at individuals like myself that just love this, love Star Wars, right? And claim that, well, if you love the sequel trilogy, you're not a fan. You know, I'm going the other way. If you really were a fan of this trilogy, it doesn't mean that you have to like the sequel trilogy. I'm not saying that. You can absolutely 100% be a hardcore Star Wars fan, bigger than I am, and hate the sequel trilogy, right? Totally. But if you're going to go so far as to spread lies and rumors, right, just for your own gain, no, I'm sorry, you're not a true fan of Star Wars. I refuse to believe that. It said, getting back to the article, that the events of The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Skywalker will be removed from canon, isolated in their own alternate timeline, and regarded as the Elseworld-like installment under the label of Star Wars Legends. If that were the case, wouldn't you think that Disney, when they bought Lucasfilm, would have probably done the same thing with the prequel trilogy, because that was, before the sequel trilogy, the most controversial thing about Star Wars, and the narrative is that most people don't like them, when the reality is, no, most of the fans actually do. I just want to point that out there. Oh, but we have proof of the reset, according to Cosmic Book News. This person offers proof that this may be happening in a scene that was included in The Rise of Skywalker, which featured Rey confronting her dark side self, where mirrors can be seen in the background. It is said it's unknown if Abrams knew that's what the scene was about, but it demonstrates the plausibility of this rumor. The scene features broken mirrors where one mirror is still intact and the dark side Rey emerges from it. Yes, the man that wrote the movie along with Chris Terrio and directed it wouldn't be unaware of the plausibility of a rumor of something that he made in a movie that would lead to the erasing of the sequel trilogy canon. You say you can't make this stuff up, but they did. They went and made this stuff up. I'm not going to share with you the rest of the article, okay? I cut it out. I cut a lot of it out because I didn't want to spend that much time on this. But I did want to spend some time, like I mentioned, talking about this. And specifically, friend of the show, Brian Martin, asked, and I know that he gets annoyed by this stuff as well. It's just, this is the type of stuff within the fandom that makes it toxic, that makes it so difficult for those of us that really like to get into the minutia to just enjoy these films for what they are, when, people out there just go and spread these lies and rumors like this. It doesn't do anything to help, and it reinforces the ideas of the individuals that also go and make content like this. It's a sad state of affairs that it's this type of stuff that gets a lot of clicks right now. But rather than going and talking about things within the movies and within the TV shows and within the books, and there's a host of topics a person could cover, no, they just go and make stuff up because they're that lazy. You know, and they have very low, probably self-esteem based on that guy's name, for crying out loud. All right, so I've said my piece on it. I don't know how much you enjoyed that or didn't enjoy it. I'm glad I got it off my chest because it's just super annoying. So, all that is to say, no. Disney and Lucasfilm are not erasing the sequel trilogy, despite what you may have heard on the internet to the contrary.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So there's a new email for the show, the Jon Justice at gmail.com. You can still use TalkShowNerd at gmail.com, but I do have a new email address, thejonjustice at gmail.com. And, of course, I'd love to hear from you on anything that I talk about on the show, specifically this next portion. Does it mean anything for the future of Star Wars that The Mandalorian was the last thing that we all agreed upon in the Star Wars fandom, and essentially pop culture was good? And it's kind of true. I heard this on another podcast, and they were talking about this, that The Mandalorian was, you know, sort of, it kind of went through immune from the rampant criticism that the sequel trilogy movies have received. And even to a certain extent, you know, a show like Star Wars Resistance, the cartoon, there wasn't a lot of negativity around that. I think people understood that with Star Wars Resistance that show was geared towards younger kids. But we all know the controversy, of course, that surrounded The Last Jedi, and we all know the controversy that surrounded The Rise of Skywalker. You know, The Mandalorian came out before The Rise of Skywalker, and it was within the Star Wars fandom the most agreed upon in the new era of Star Wars thing that everybody seemed to like. The biggest criticism that I heard from The Mandalorian was that from individuals who just thought that there was too much what they would refer to as fan service. I know Zach over at Knights of Vader had made a comment, has made comments about that first episode that he had a lot of issues with because he just felt that things were, I'm paraphrasing, but we're too on the nose. But I'm wondering, what does it mean that The Mandalorian was such a success? I'm going to be very interested later this year when we get the season 2 of The Mandalorian, what they do based off the success of season 1. If you've watched the gallery making of episodes on the Disney Plus streaming app, it's pretty clear that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau weren't 100% sure what it was that they were going to work, and they really just felt like they were doing something fun and different. The explanations that they gave as to why they went with why they didn't go with like a Boba Fett or an IG-88, and instead they went with, you know, Din Djarin and the Mandalorian and IG-11, and it seemed pretty clear to me that they were experimenting. They were really doing a lot of what George Lucas did in that original A New Hope film. Right? Can we do this? Does this work? Jon Favreau specifically said, we didn't design and create The Mandalorian based off of what George Lucas was, you know, inspired us with. We based The Mandalorian off of what inspired George Lucas. And then we added our own elements to it, and those elements all worked. And I don't disagree with that. I love The Mandalorian. In my opinion, though, moving forward, I think it does mean that we're going to get more live-action TV shows. It will be interesting to see what the technology for the volume does. That's the means at which they're creating a lot of the set pieces, which with these almost 360-degree these high-definition screens that serve as the backdrop that replace the green screen. I think we're going to see that utilized in ways moving forward in the live-action TV shows, but also in films as well. I'll be interested to see what Star Wars does because of the success of that show, particularly in that era, and the pacing of the show, the content of the show. For me, though, while I love The Mandalorian, Star Wars needs, and I'll continue to beat this drum, Star Wars needs the building of the myth and the legend. That is going to be key. It won't be enough, in my opinion, just to be entertaining and just to tickle the nostalgic feels, right? The Mando got it right narrative right now. That's a good one, right? That's kind of the narrative surrounding The Mandalorian, is The Mandalorian got it right. You've heard this even from those individuals that I was ripping on before that lie about stuff, right? The Mandalorian was the one that I think the part of the fandom that likes the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, like me, looked at The Mandalorian and goes, yeah, that was good, right? That other part of the fandom that hates the sequel trilogy and makes up garbage about it went, well, that got it right. And it helps to reinforce their views they didn't like the sequel trilogy. But that's going to wear off. You know, Mandalorian, in my opinion, isn't going to be able to continue the success that it's had if it doesn't go and try to break a little bit more new ground. And what I'm hoping for in season 2, and what it sounds like we're getting with this potential of connected live-action TV shows on the Disney Plus channel, it sounds like they're going to be expanding the mythology a bit and growing it a bit. We got a little bit, right? We don't know what's going on with the child. We don't know what's going on with the Darksaber, okay, and that particular character. So there is some mystery that is surrounding the show, but right now we're in that phase where we were when the first Star Wars came out. And that's a good place to be, by the way. And what I mean by that is that, you know, A New Hope comes out and it's a massive hit and it's popular. But we as fans and as viewers, especially as kids or our parents when we were kids, we just sat back and went, that was rad. It'd be great if they made more. We didn't have the means back then to sort of speculate, and we didn't really get into much of the, boy, Obi-Wan Kenobi mentioned the Clone Wars, huh? Oh, Vader got away. I wonder what happens there, because we didn't have a lot to build off of. Then, as it progressed, of course, we know how that played out and how the mythology was built upon as you move through The Empire Strikes Back and you Return of the Jedi. And then you go back to the prequel trilogy, and there's a little bit that's added to it when it comes to finding out more about the Jedi. And then, of course, we enter into the sequel trilogy, which, in my opinion, was never going to be able to get a fair shake just because of the world that we live in right now. We live in a world where we're so interconnected that it actually drives us apart. And with the sequel trilogy and social networking, that's never going to go away. You know, certain platforms might, but there's always going to be other platforms out there. It's going to be impossible moving forward to escape the criticism. I think right now the reason why The Mandalorian is escaping a lot of that criticism is that, one, it is a great show. Don't misunderstand. It is a fantastic show. It hits the nostalgia feels. It came at a time when we were coming off of the controversy of The Last Jedi prior to The Rise of Skywalker, and so I think there were fans out there that desperately wanted something to love about Star Wars who may have hated The Last Jedi, but it also was the start of something new. And that's where I think the genius of what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau did rests, in that they didn't, and I mentioned this before, they didn't go the route of Boba Fett, because Boba Fett would have had with him a bunch of preconceived ideas and notions. You could potentially bring him in season 2 and expand upon his mythology there, but it's not the core of what The Mandalorian is about, and I think that was a genius move on their part. So, season 2 for me, it's going to be very important for the storytelling and the future of the franchise, and future seasons of The Mandalorian, to begin to build that myth and legend, because that's what we as fans thrive off of. Even when it gets negative, we thrive off of that speculation. We thrive off of that wondering. I mean, that's what these podcasts were built upon, right? Was this desire to want to know more and to speculate. And let me give you an example as we switch into the next part of the show this week. For me, this is really fascinating, and I love what's happened here in The Rise of Skywalker, and I don't know if it's ever going to be addressed again, but I dig it from a standpoint of Star Wars does ambiguity really, really well. And what I'm talking about is, in The Rise of Skywalker, the Sith Eternal. I'm really interested in the Sith Eternal. And I will buy more ancillary material to find out more about the Sith Eternal, because I'm really interested in it. I've mentioned before some of my complaints, as few as they are, for The Rise of Skywalker, because I love that movie so much. But I've mentioned before some of my complaints about The Rise of Skywalker on Exegol because of just some visual things that I would have liked to have seen different. But some of that stems from the fact of they didn't do a lot of explaining, and so I like the fact they kind of left it open. It's really interesting, and I like that it was left ambiguous. It's a lot like the original trilogy, right? The rules kind of dictate we don't always get all the answers, and that's how life is, right? It's not what society demands, but it's the reality. We don't always get all the answers. And not having all the answers in the original trilogy was a great thing. Who is this weird holographic person suddenly showing up that Vader's talking to in The Empire Strikes Back? Oh, look, here he is in Return of the Jedi, and oh my gosh, he's creepy and evil and bad, but we didn't really know where he came from. And it would have been okay if George Lucas had never told us. Now, granted, if the original trilogy had come out in the social networking world that we live in, that probably would have been dissected to the nth degree, and people would have probably pitched a fit, wondering how in the world did they build another Death Star so fast, and where did he come from? Why isn't there an explanation? I'm fine with it. And that's why I'm kind of fine with the fact that they left it so ambiguous in The Rise of Skywalker, because that's what Star Wars does. Star Wars is fantastical. It's fantasy. It's epic. We don't have to know everything. Now, speaking of which, this is what drew me to this article. I'm not the biggest fan of Screen Rant. It is a clickbaity website. But when these types of websites do go and just do articles based off of knowledge that's out there and then craft articles around it, I dig that. I like that. So I'll give some credit where it's due. This particular article I thought was pretty cool. Palpatine's Sith crowd on Exegol explained. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker introduces Sith cultists, a planet of Exegol. I just love that concept. I just love this idea that there was a group of individuals out there that have been building this massive fleet of 1,000 Star Destroyers with Death Star destroying technology on there, and they've been sort of feeding this stuff to the First Order, and it's all because of their staunch belief in the Emperor's plans. Now, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker reveals Emperor has returned and is building an army on the planet of Exegol, where a crowd of hundreds, if not thousands of followers worship the Sith Order and Darth Sidious. Now, the movie doesn't explain in detail who the followers are, but the visual dictionary and novelization name them as Sith Eternal, a faction dedicated to bringing about a new empire. Their creation was decades before the sequel trilogy, and their influence went beyond their home planet. After the deaths of Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, the Sith Order was destroyed, and the Jedi prophecy of the Chosen One was fulfilled. However, deep in the unknown regions of the galaxy, a group of cultists on the planet Exegol still believed in the Sith religion. They kept working in the shadows to install a new empire, once again ruled by a Sith Lord. For decades, they built a new fleet of Star Destroyers, infiltrated the First Order, and influenced Kylo Ren and his path to the dark side. They sought and utilized many secrets of the dark side of the Force, indoctrinating the entire population of Exegol into doing their bidding. And they did all of this under the guidance and orders of Emperor Palpatine himself. As he fell down the reactor shaft in the second to Death Star, Palpatine, the Emperor transferred his consciousness to a clone body created on Exegol. However, it became quickly apparent the Emperor and the Sith Eternal that clones could not sustain him for long, their bodies eventually decaying beyond usefulness. The cultists continued to experiment, hoping to find the right formula to fully restore their leader. One of the clones managed to survive, but could not wield the Force. Instead, Darth Sidious used him to continue his bloodline, and a clone eventually married a woman and fathered Rey. I love that story element, man. Star Wars is science fiction fantasy, and it's great at it. And the sequel trilogy was great at it. And The Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi were great at it. Snoke was a creation. Snoke was a creation of the Sith Eternal and Exegol. Perhaps knowing that, without a proper body, he could not rule the First Order, and his plan wasn't ready for him to reveal his survival, Sidious ordered the Sith Eternal to create Snoke, right? And this is more speculation here, but it's still fun. One of Snoke's goals was to prepare Kylo Ren to rule the Sith, and we've seen this in some of the ancillary comic books, testing his commitment to the dark side. Another servant of the Sith Eternal cult was the Jedi killer and Sith assassin Ochi of Bestoon. It was Ochi who sought the Emperor's family and killed Rey's parents, but couldn't retrieve her in Jakku before dying. After Rey became a Jedi, since the cultists failed to give him a proper body, the Emperor decided that she would be his perfect heir. Once Rey arrived on Exegol, he gathered the cultists to perform a ritual that would turn her to the dark side and give her a throne of the Sith. I want to stop here real quick. A quick little side note deviation that has nothing to do with Star Wars, but something that I just read reminded me of it. I'm a big Smiths fan, right? The Smiths. Their song, How Soon Is Now, it starts off with lead singer Morrissey singing the words, I am the sun and the air. It was only like the last year that I realized that sun and air was actually not S-U-N and A-I-R. It was S-O-N and H-E-I-R. My mind was blown when I found that out. The dual meaning of that's incredible, and I didn't even realize it. And I listened to that song since it came out in the 80s until today, and I found out that it was actually the sun and the I am the sun and the air, meaning I am the sun and the air to blank, not I am the sun in the sky and the air around. I just thought that was amazing. All right, back to the article. Meanwhile, an army built by Sith Eternal fought off the Resistance forces on the dark skies of Exegol. In the end, Rey channeled the spirits of all the Jedi and destroyed Darth Sidious. The ensuing explosion of Force energy killed the Emperor and wiped out all the cultists in the room. With the First Order also... spoiler alert, by the way. With the First Order... also defeated, the Sith Eternal cult was completely destroyed along with their leader. But who knows for how long? The Emperor also knew he would be betrayed by Vader and created the Sith Eternal as a contingency plan. Darth Sidious planning for another defeat wouldn't be surprising. All right, I got a little bit distracted right there at the end because my beloved Bella wanted to come into my room and I had to let her in when I read that last sentence. And I want to double back to that really quick. The article wraps up with, but who knows for how long? The Emperor always knew he would be betrayed by Vader and created the Sith Eternal as a contingency plan. Darth Sidious planning for another defeat wouldn't be surprising. I do not expect that Palpatine's going to come back in any way, shape, or form. I think that Disney... and specifically Lucasfilm is going to be moving forward, and creating new stories and timelines. And maybe perhaps someday down the line we'll get an episode 10, but it won't be for a long time. And I seriously doubt that there will be another return of Palpatine. Now, Screen Rant has another one. And again, this is fun. That was fun speculation. This is actually really interesting to me because for those that have, again, followed the other podcast and the controversies swirling around how much did they know beforehand when this was being created, and they should have planned out this trilogy, and why didn't they do that? And again, if you listen to the show for any length of time, I don't care, right? I understand you can go a couple of different ways. You can pick one director and have them plan it all out and map it all out, or you can hire different directors and do a story and have them pick up a baton and run with it and create their own story. I happen to like that. I like that way of creating. I'm more of a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants when I write my novels. So, this is interesting, though. Palpatine's Rise of Skywalker Return was planned before The Last Jedi. So here's what the article says, and the argument they try to make. Concept art from The Rise of Skywalker confirms that Palpatine's return was actually planned before The Last Jedi was released in theaters. So, in the concept art, Palpatine's resurrection had been planned. The unexpected return of Emperor Palpatine drove the plot of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. It's been heavily criticized with no real setup on the big screen and surprisingly little explanation. Lucasfilm has since spent time explaining Palpatine's return in official tie-ins, as we were just talking about. Lucasfilm's president, Kathleen Kennedy, initially claimed that Palpatine's return was always part of the plan, insisting it was part of the blueprint for the entire trilogy. Her claim was flatly denied, rebuted by Colin Trevorrow, the first director of Episode 9, who left in September 2017 as a result of creative differences with Lucasfilm. A copy of Trevorrow's script, called Duel of the Fates, subsequently leaked online, confirming Darth Sidious was never a part of his version. According to Trevorrow, Palpatine's return was J.J. Abrams' idea. Now, this is where I feel like there's been a loss of translation, okay, that explains Kathleen Kennedy saying it was part of the plan, insisting it was a blueprint for the entire trilogy, and J.J. Abrams saying the same thing as well. What I think they meant by that, and I've explained this before, but I'll do it again for the sake of this particular article that I'm covering. J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy both said that, but remember, J.J. Abrams was never going to be a part of episodes 8 and 9. He was one and done. He was coming in to do The Force Awakens, reset, the sequel trilogy and the absence of Star Wars films in theaters since Revenge of the Sith, and then, bow off and hand the baton over to Rian Johnson, who was supposed to write both 8 and 9, and he didn't. Okay. J.J. Abrams has subsequently said that back when they were crafting The Force Awakens and writing that story, that Palpatine did enter into the mix. They had conversations about Palpatine and that perhaps they could utilize him later on. Now, whether or not JJ had any intention of doing that later on, who knows, right? That being said, though, that was part of the conversation during The Force Awakens. They decided to, and I think it was the right move. They decided to go the route of creating Snoke, provide some ambiguity there, just have him be a hologram for The Force Awakens, and then when Rian Johnson takes over the trilogy, he can do what he wants. That, to me, makes a lot of sense, and it's very much the same type of mentality that we saw with what? The Mandalorian. Rather than blatantly come out with Palpatine's back, we'll go, hey, you know what? Let's create another baddie and provide some mystery around him who's now in charge of this First Order, and we'll create him in such a way. This is my own speculation and sort of conjecture here, right? But we'll create him in such a way that maybe this will provide an opportunity later on to either stick with him and give him some backstory in the movies with the other content creators or an ancillary material, or if somebody wants to go and play with the idea of Palpatine, they can always say that Palpatine was pulling the strings. This concept art for The Rise of Skywalker that it continues to surface online, Phil Sostak has taken to Twitter, he writes the books on these, to join the conversation. Concept artist Kevin Jenkins shared a superb sketch of the resurrected Palpatine, and Sostak clarified the timeline. The Palpatine sketch is dated November 1st, 2017, he pointed out. But the earliest Palpatine pieces are dated October 11th, 2017, which, if you've read The Art of Skywalker, you'll know is mere days after the art department started on this film. So, looking at the timeline, it would seem to confirm that Palpatine's return really was one of the first ideas that Abrams brought to the table when he was hired to replace Trevorrow, probably because that's what he had in mind going back to The Force Awakens. The style of the sketch will remind fans of the classic Dark Empire comics from the old expanded universe, a no longer canon story in which a cloned emperor returned to ravage the galaxy with superweapons. Notice the harness. There's a harness in the picture that Palpatine is wearing as well, an element that did make its way into the final theatrical cut of the movie. This is a much more deep cut into Star Wars lore. It's a so-called Omen harness from the expanded universe. Abrams' plans for Palpatine were clearly well developed at this stage, which frankly makes the decision not to explain the Emperor's return in the script itself all the more surprising. I disagree with that, but whatever. What makes this all the more striking, though, the article goes on to say, is that this confirms that Palpatine's return was already in the works before The Last Jedi was released in December of 2017. This was still well after additional photography had been completed for The Last Jedi, however, so clearly Rian Johnson's film didn't change the shape in any way to help set up Palpatine. Reshoots for Star Wars The Last Jedi appear to have focused on the late Carrie Fisher, Canto Bight, Broom Boy, and Vice Admiral Holdo. Not on Kylo Ren or Supreme Leader Snoke, who could potentially have been used to hint to the greater dark side threat. So, my biggest takeaway from this was, again, the fact that it would appear that J.J. Abrams, when he took over with Chris Terrio to write The Rise of Skywalker, they immediately went to that Palpatine. And in my view, based off of what J.J. Abrams has said, that's because that was an idea they had before. The Rise of Skywalker does have a lot of similarities with Dark Empire. And in a good way. I really think that series of comics is really, really interesting and compelling. And I was not familiar with them prior to the release of The Rise of Skywalker, and I did some podcasts on it before the release of the movie. But I'm really happy with the product that they gave us. Obviously, I'm a massive fan of The Rise of Skywalker, but I really like what they did in Dark Empire, and I feel like J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio did a really good job of sort of cherry-picking out of that story elements they could put into The Rise of Skywalker, and it worked fantastic in my view. TheJohnJustice@gmail.com. I'm curious to know what you think. Any comments you have on the show this week, again, drop me an email, TheJohnJustice@gmail.com. All right, let's switch gears and go to, not a lot, but a little bit of listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, friend of the show, Kirtana, writes this. Hey, John, I'm sorry I've been really busy the past few weeks. You do not need to apologize. But thank you so much for doing the Sequel Trilogy episode. I really loved listening to your perspective on the whole trilogy. I completely agree with you. The Sequel Trilogy is about the dyad rather than the Rebels versus the Empire story again. And I loved when you listed every small moment in the trilogy that you love. Thank you so much for doing this episode, and have a great day. I really love the show. Thank you so much, Kirtana. I really do appreciate that. And a friend of the show, Shlomo, writes this. I've never heard of a podcast doing this, but how about a series about deleted scenes from the 9 films, which would be great to have in extended versions in the future, and which should be forgotten? He said that Shlomo is not without a sense of humor. Could fill a week's worth during the long wait for the 2021 or 2022 film. And you could use video again, says Shlomo. I know, I need to bring the video back, but again, I'm sorry, I got distracted. J.J. Abrams tweeted for the first time in a long time, and I have notifications set up for him back from the Star Wars time that he did, and it's just because the first 3 episodes of his little voice show on the Apple TV app are actually out. So nothing Star Wars related, but I brought it up on the show anyways. Shlomo, that's a really good idea, and it's something that I'm actually going to look into doing in coming weeks, because I like the idea of going over some of the deleted scenes. Because there's some interesting gems in there, especially, well, for all the films, actually. I'll mention one. Before we wrap the show up, I'll mention one deleted scene, and I'm going to take your idea and run with it for future episodes. But the one deleted scene that comes top of mind that I wish had been included is, and it would have required a little bit of story change, but there's a deleted scene of Luke Skywalker in a cave on Tatooine building his green lightsaber. I love that scene. I think that I actually think that Return of the Jedi could have really, really used that. Seeing Luke prior to going into Jabba's palace and seeing him constructing, using the Force, the lightsaber, I think would have been a really nice addition to that film. It would have been a nice way to sort of connect a little bit more to The Empire Strikes Back. I know that sounds weird, but it has a very Empire Strikes Back vibe to it, in my opinion. It reminds me a lot about the Dark Side Cave, just the way it was shot and sort of the mystery around it, and how intense Mark Hamill played in that scene with his hood up and using the Force to manipulate the pieces of the lightsaber around as he built it. That would have required a change, because obviously R2-D2, pops it out of his head. I don't know if you heard that or not, but I went, whoo, pops it out of his head for Luke to catch it. Which, by the way, makes me laugh. That whole scene in Return of the Jedi is so funny, because you get R2 tossing the lightsaber, and I just feel like it's hanging in the air for entirely too long as everybody waits for Luke to catch it, ignite it, and then wipe them all out. It is a minor gripe. It does not pull me out of the movie. It just takes off. You're kind of waiting, and there's all these bad guys standing around Luke. Clearly, they can see he's going to grab something, probably a weapon. You had an opportunity. You had one job. So, Shlomo, I will give your ideas some thought, and thank you so much to Cortana and Shlomo for the email. Where's the rest of you guys, by the way? Send me some email. Although I didn't do a show last week, so that's kind of not that big of a surprise. All right, hey, listen, that wraps things up for the podcast this week. Go to mynerdworld.net. Right now I have I ran a promotion for EMBARK Book 1. And right now the ebook is priced at 99 cents, and Treasure in Darkness and The Vanishing War, books 2 and 3. The ebooks for those are priced at $2.99. So right now you can get the entire ebook, the entire trilogy in ebook for less than $7. How cool is that? So go to mynerdworld.net. You can check that out there. I'm also doing a daily blog now on the website, although I haven't done one today. I need to do that. So just musings that I have. I decided to add some daily content to the website to help drive some traffic. So I've been putting up stuff there on the blog daily. You can check it out. And if you want to support the show, that's how you can support the show. I don't do Patreon, but obviously if you're a science fiction fan, if you're a reader, or if you know any readers, gift them the gift of a book. And go to either Amazon.com or, again, mynerdworld.net. Look for EMBARK, Jon Justice. 99 cents for the ebook for book 1, and then $2.99 for both ebooks 2 and 3. The audiobook for The Vanishing War should be done any day now. They finished their review of the audio, and I had 2 things that had to be fixed. That was back on the 7th. That was back on Tuesday. I fixed them immediately and sent it back to Audible. So I basically keep refreshing to see when the audiobook is available. If you want to be the first to know when EMBARK, The Vanishing War Book 3's audiobook is available, or when the next book in the series is out, which is finished and is currently being edited, and I cannot wait to get it out there. Book 4 is, I'm looking at it right now on my desktop. I could actually read to you Book 4 right now, because it's done. It's being edited right now. So if you want information on that book, or the moment that the audiobook for Book 3 is available, then you need to get on the mailing list. And how do you get on the mailing list? You email me at thejon, Jon, at thejonjustice@gmail.com, and you say, hey, add me to the mailing list. It's that simple. I do not sell your email to anybody else, and the only emails you're going to get from me are about the books or the podcast, and I don't email that often, so I'm not going to spam you. So email me, again, thejonjustice, Jon, at gmail.com, and be added to the mailing list, and go pick up a copy of the books for you and a friend. And I need reviews. I keep pushing that. I got to have some reviews. So if you read the books and you enjoyed them, please, 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 please take a moment and go and leave a review for any of the 3 books. But I need reviews, especially for books 2 and 3. So you're like, oh, I'll do it later. No, go do it right now, because I need them. And it can be super short. Just be like, hey, it was a really fun book, and I look forward to the next one. Speaking of the next one, by the way, Book 4 is going to be a real treat. I'm super excited to get it out there. It's a lot of fun. I may have mentioned it before, but it's written in first person, which I didn't do on the first 3 books. The first 3 books are third person omniscient, but I wrote it in first person, and because of that, it's a lot of fun. It's funny. It's almost a comedy. It is a spin-off story based off events that happened in The Vanishing War. If you've read The Vanishing War, you know what I'm talking about. But it's a really fun adventure, and I can't wait to get it out here in the next couple of months. All right, I'm going to shut up now and go enjoy my weekend. I hope that, again, you are safe. I hope you have the opportunity to pick up a copy of EMBARK Book 1, 2, and 3 on Amazon, Jon Justice, or at mynerdworld.net. And stay healthy. Right? It's a crazy world out there right now. All right, that's it. I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.